Once in a little village surrounded by hills, there lived a boy named Cavvy, and he loved to draw circles in the sand. Every day he'd sit near the well where the people came together, and he'd draw a big circle with a stick. "Why do you always draw that?" people asked. He smiled. "It's my friendship circle. Everyone I love goes inside." Soon people noticed something strange. Cavvy's circle kept getting bigger and bigger. At first, it was just his family, then his classmates, then the grumpy baker, and then the woman who spoke a different language, even the traveler with torn shoes whom no one had ever spoken to was invited into the circle. One day a villager frowned. "You're letting people in who don't belong. They're not like us." Cavvy looked up, but they're still people. And I think love makes more sense when it includes more people, not fewer. "Well, what if somebody doesn't want to be in your circle?" "Well, then I have to keep on drawing it bigger until there's room enough for them to feel safe to come in." Years later, Cavvy became a wise elder. The village grew to a town, and the old well became a gathering place for many kinds of people. And every child who learned to draw circles in the sand remembered what Cavvy said. We're all part of the same big story. And in that story, no one should be left out. It is now time for the RE moment. You may be seated. Religion has always been a very important force in my life. And yes, I am using the word force, because like some of you, it was battered into me with no real choice on my part. Around the age of 13 or 14, I finally figured out I really just did not believe what my family believed. Not even close. They believed words in a book. I believed something that couldn't be put into words, but it spoke to me quietly, often when I was down by the lake. I heard and felt things that had nothing to do with what they talked about. And I did not understand why what I knew was so very different from what others seemed to think was true. I started exploring religions other than the one my family chose, usually by reading books about them. On the rare occasion that I met someone who belonged to one of those other religions, I would question them mercilessly. Some things I found out I liked, some I didn't. But I never found a religion that fully agreed with my truth. Always, there were major gaps that I just could not cross over. I also started finding about the history of my family's religious tradition. And after a while, I was really appalled at what I heard. Specifically, I got angry at how the original message had been massacred. And in my infinite wisdom and understanding, I decided I would start my own religion. That didn't last very long. because it soon occurred to me that if Jesus and the message he taught could be turned into the monstrosities that I saw, what possible chance could anything I could articulate have of not being twisted into something horrid? So I gave up on the idea. I gave up on the idea that I could spread a truth that everyone would just love to hear. I gave up on all that and just tried to dig deeper into my own relationship with the universe. But because of that experience, part of me believes that others may have a similar wordless experience. And I never want to stop that. So I vowed that I would never try to tell anyone else what to believe. Rather, I would encourage them to explore for themselves what their truths might be. But it's not always easy. Now, if you would, let us take a moment. Religions are welcome here, as long as they are life-affirming and don't put down others. We've had a few services in the past and some upcoming services talking about different religious systems. But for some of us, certain systems are problematic. And I'm going to talk today a bit about the religion I have the most trouble with, probably because it's the one I'm most familiar with. And I have a lot of trouble with it, but it has also greatly influenced my values. Christianity. Please hear, I am probably going to say some things that you will not agree with, no matter where you stand. Keep in mind, these things are just my opinion, not necessarily shared by anyone else, nor am I telling you to share them. You have your own experiences. I'm just sharing mine. Now, I am not a Christian. But I was raised in a Christian household, and that influenced a lot of my understandings. These days, I'm a UU. But let me make one thing perfectly clear. I am not a Unitarian Universalist because I agree with their values. I'm a Unitarian Universalist because their values agree with mine. Which means I'm not trying to align my values or my understandings with anyone else or with any particular theological system. I am the primary authority on my values. I'm open to discussion. I'm open to listening to others, and I may learn from others. But in the end, I come to my own conclusions. And I expect the same of you. You come to your convictions. You don't have to bring them in line with anyone else's. That's what makes us UU. We share values, but we don't demand conformity. Now, one of my core values, in fact, the core value, is something I really believe and I really struggle with. I believe that every individual is worthy. That means every single person matters. And they have to be treated with dignity and respect. No exceptions. Now, that doesn't mean every person is wonderful. Nor do I have to put up with actions or words that belittle or harm anyone, including myself. As my colleague Meg Barnhouse says, every person has dignity and worth, but not every idea does. Dignity and respect. Does that mean I have to respect a Ku Klux Klaner? Well, I do have to respect their personhood. But I do not have to respect what they do or say. I can and should hold them accountable. But that doesn't give me permission to disregard their fundamental humanity or rights. Their ideas are unworthy, not them. And this is a tricky tightrope to balance. And I often have problems with it because sometimes it's difficult to separate a person from their actions. After all, don't our actions tell other people who we really are? And if someone's actions are universally despicable, doesn't that say something about them? I hate logic. When you really try to support your values and explore them, you can really dig yourself into a hole. Okay, let's try this again. Do I really think every person has value? Because isn't that what I'm saying? But if someone does those consistently terrible things, doesn't that say something about who they are? Take Hitler, for instance. Do we really think that Hitler has value? We all know he had a horrific childhood. His father was a drunk who beat him frequently, and that can warp a kid. What if we could have taken him out of that environment and placed him with a loving, caring family? Would he have turned out differently? Or would he have still been the monster that he turned out to be? Do we really think that even in the best of circumstances, everyone turns out good? Is it just bad parenting? No. There are truly nasty people out there. People who have no trouble hurting others. There are sociopaths. We don't know if sociopathy is genetic or environmental. Could be both. And how do you treat sociopaths with dignity and respect? Answer, very carefully. Honestly, I tend to think that society would be better off if most of them were put someplace where they couldn't get at the rest of us. But that idea is highly problematic. How do we figure out just who is a sociopath? And what would the appeals process look like? Plus, upon exploring the idea, I discovered that sociopathy has a spectrum, which means that a goodly number of people may have a certain degree of sociopathy. And how do you figure out how much we can put up with? How much is safe to be around? And how much might you need to survive? How is it determined where any one individual is at? It gets so complex, and I don't have any answers. But somehow I cling to the idea that it's my responsibility still to treat everyone with the inherent dignity and worth that I believe they have. Like I said, I do hold some values that Christians claim, but let me clarify here, I'm not talking about some of the things we hear in some pulpits. Frankly, many of them give me the willies. I'm appalled at the prosperity gospel. White Christian nationalism makes me cry. Both are polar opposites of what I understand the original message to have been. Now, I'm talking about the values that about 2,000 years a certain Jewish man started to teach. He was truly a revolutionary individual with outstanding insights and care for others. We know him as Jesus, but his real name was probably closer to Yeshua Bar Miriam. And I think Jesus gets a bad rap these days. He's promoted as a miracle worker and a savior, and I don't think he was either one of those things. He is known as a man of many sorrows, and I don't think that's true either. There's a part in the Bible where there were children that were so enamored of him that they started crowding around him, and his disciples got annoyed and said, we have to get rid of these kids. We have to make room for the adults. And Jesus said, no. Let them come here. In my experience, kids are not attracted to dour, sad adults. They like to be around fun people. People who tell stories, play games, people who make them happy. And I don't think it was any different 2,000 years ago. Those kids wanted to be around somebody who made them feel good, who laughed with them, who gave them a sense of their own worth. Now, the Pharisees, the guys in charge, were appalled because Jesus hung out with publicans and sinners. One of his friends was a tax collector. Give me a break. Respectable people kept on inviting him to their homes for dinner. But Jesus seemed to prefer the company of prostitutes and drinkers. And it is said that he really enjoyed wine. Now, this isn't the picture we usually get from the pulpit. In the Bible, we're specifically told of a man who walked around asking wealthy folks to give everything they had to the poor. Not very comfortable to be around. But we don't hear much about that unless it's pledging time and they're talking about giving your money to the church. Oh, and Jesus kept on doing miracles, some of which really do sound kind of nifty. I would have loved to have seen him walking on the water, but it must have been kind of difficult because the real miracle would be, how do you keep your balance with the waves going back and forth? And I should mention, this is a problem for me. I'm not quite sure what use that might be, walking on the water. As I see it, a major result would be that a lot of honest boat builders would be unemployed. It would probably make fishing very different, although I suppose the nets could still go underneath the surface of the waves. And Jesus is said to have healed people, which would have been a very good thing, I admit, although today we would question whether or not some of those illnesses might have been psychosomatic. But true confession here, I'm not very interested in the question of whether or not he performed miracles. That doesn't much matter to me. I mean, I think it's a good thing that 2,000 years ago, a man was cured of his blindness and could see for the first time. Wow. Good for him. I'm so glad. But even if it's true, so what? I don't see what that has to do with us today. It's only important if you think that somehow that proves that Jesus was a savior. And I don't think he was. No, it's not the teaching, it's the teachings of Jesus, not the miracles, that interest me. Oh, and a quick sidebar here. Recently, I've heard a lot of talk about whether or not Jesus actually ever existed. Personally, I think the evidence is rather overwhelming, but for the sake of argument, so what if he didn't? Somebody came up with those ideas, and I don't care who it was. I think what was important is those ideas and the values. And who said it, who came up with it is just a distraction. The idea of loving your neighbor, not judging, of forgiving, of reaching out and actually helping the poor and the dispossessed. Those were radical, earth-shaking ideas. And somebody did come up with them 2,000 years ago when they nailed the people to a cross and thought that there was nothing wrong with genocide. A remarkable individual, whoever it was that came up with those things. But something happened around 300 years later. By this time, there were a number of Christians scattered all over, but it should be said they did not necessarily agree with each other on all sorts of theological beliefs. Frankly, they had vastly different understandings about just about everything. Jesus was human. Jesus was divine. Jesus was semi-divine. Jesus was less than God. Jesus was equal with God. Oh, they argued and they argued. But the message was starting to get lost. They argued constantly over theology, not ethics. Now, by this time, Constantine was the major power in Rome, and he was having all sorts of difficulties. His empire was split up into different factions, and it was beginning to fall apart, and Constantine needed a win. He needed a way to make everyone accept the same authority himself, and that would make things a lot easier to control. So Constantine looked around and found there was a small group of folks calling themselves Christians who had something going for them that he wanted very badly. You see, even though they had vastly different theological understandings, they all did have one thing in common. They had an encompassing truth claim. Each group knew the truth, and they insisted that they were right. And they could not, would not acknowledge any other truth as being valid. And this meant, among other things, that they were very loyal to their own groups and their own leaders. So they not only disagreed with each other, they wouldn't make sacrifices to Roman gods or participate in other religious rituals, but like I said, they were very loyal to their leaders. Now, this theology had a very interesting side effect. The ruling families had a lot of investment in supporting the old gods. They'd built the temples and financed the priesthoods. They certainly had no interest in a religion that told them to give up their wealth or to forgive their enemies. Why, they were the families that supported the members of government and quite often the military leaders. Why on earth would they want to give all that up? Christianity initially appealed to the slaves, the poor folk, the craftspeople, the merchant class. Remember back when we experienced COVID? For the first time, many folks figured out that the real backbones of our society, the important people, the people who often made it possible for the rest of us to continue, were not the well-to-do. The wealthy were almost useless. No, the important people to keep society running were the farmers, the delivery people, the plumbers, the electricians, the blue-collar folks, the garbage collectors. They were the ones that mattered. They kept us going. Without them, we would have all been in trouble. We could easily do without a millionaire or two, but we needed the people who delivered our groceries. Constantine knew that. Yes, he had to keep the wealthy contented, but the real engine in society were the blue-collar folks. They had relatively little power, and a goodly number of them were Christians who had a brand loyalty. So Constantine figured if he adopted an attitude of acceptance, even promoting the Christian faith, those folks could be counted on to support him. Besides, they already had a very convenient hierarchical power structure that he could tap into. So he did just that. But since the Christians were constantly fighting each other, that made it difficult to promote unity, which he needed. So he called all the Christian bishops to come to Nicaea. He gave them traveling money and safe passage, provided luxurious places to stay, the whole 9 yards. He was acknowledging their faith. He seemed to be aware of how important they were. That must have been very flattering. The Christian leaders went from being somewhat persecuted to suddenly being invited by the emperor himself to set something up. I have to say, the Christians were not nearly as persecuted as Hollywood would have us believe. Yes, there was definitely discrimination that was very unpleasant, but it wasn't quite as widespread as we have been told. But now, the bishops were asked to come and put together a theology. Wow, cool beans. You might imagine that Constantine, after giving the initial speech to set the agenda, you might think he went into the other room and left the bishops to debate. No. He stayed there. He presided over each and every meeting. And you better believe he had a hand in deciding what would work. Frankly, he didn't care about the teachings of Jesus at all. Give your money to the poor? Nonsense. Forgive your enemies? Get real. Constantine set up a rather clever system whereby the church maintained control over all things theological, and politicians took over the responsibility of governing. But the nifty part was that they supported each other. Political rulers were appointed by God, and the church was supported by the state, given lots of special privileges, no dummies they. And as time passed, it became more and more codified until it was impossible to separate political and theological thinking. But the message of Jesus got lost. The idea that we should care about each other got lost. Later on, Martin Luther and a few other radical thinkers thought that maybe the focus of the church should lie more with spiritual matters rather than on holding on to power. Maybe, just maybe, the message of Jesus was important. Those were fighting words, and a lot of good people lost their lives in the struggle. When the young United States insisted on separation between church and state, that was one of the most astounding and revolutionary ideas that they came up with. So here we all are, struggling to find ways to live our true values, and not the ones we say we believe, but the ones that we actually live. Traditional Christianity is not for me, but I strongly suspect that I am a follower of the teachings of Jesus, mainly because I think those teachings are profoundly useful and timeless. And there's one teaching above all that I think is of paramount importance. Jesus taught that we should love our neighbor. And by neighbor, he meant everyone we come into contact with. Everyone is our neighbor. Most of the Western religions and many of the others would be comfortable with the phrase, "We are all God's children." Our former first principle as Unitarian Universalists states that we affirm and promote the inherent dignity and worth of every individual. I believe these are three ways of saying the same thing. Loving your neighbor, everyone being God's child, treating everyone with dignity and worth. They're all saying that everyone matters. We can't have different rights for different people. We must treat each other with dignity and respect. Whatever happened to that message? Isn't that the overarching value that we want to hold to? Affirming and promoting dignity and worth in every individual. Those words are easy to say, harder to live. In the opening story, Kavi drew a circle, and those within the circle mattered. And he kept on drawing the circle larger and larger until everyone was included. Where do we draw our circles? Do we include the dispossessed? Do we include people who look differently than we do? Do we include the hungry, the poor, the disabled? Do we include people who might love differently, the transgender, or those who might have a different gender expression? Do we include people who have made mistakes and may be in prison? Do we include people who have no home and the people who have no country? Do we include people who worship differently and the people who voted differently? Sometimes that's hard to do, but I think it's worth a try. Let us be brave enough to draw our circles to include us all. So be it. There will be a talk back after the service in the conference room. All are welcome to come. In the coming week, most of us will be celebrating Thanksgiving. And those of us here have so very much to be thankful for. Most, if not all of us, can afford to eat at least one meal a day, which is more than the vast amount of humanity has experienced. Most of us have safe places to live and people who care about us. And we have this community, a safe place to explore and share our deepest understandings and to be our authentic selves. I am so grateful that this community exists. I feel blessed to be here, to know you. Thank you for being you. I hope this week is filled with people that you care about and who care about you. Blessed be.